Today we're going to talk about section 5.2, rational equations. We're going to solve those and we're going to use the domain to make sure we checked for extraneous roots or answers that don't really belong. The things we need to remember though are rational equations are fractions. Just like any other fractions, when we add and subtract or we want to solve things with them, we've got to make sure we pay attention to things like common denominators and other things like that that we did in elementary school with our plain number fractions. So keep those things in mind as we're looking at these. So let's start with an example. Let's say we have this equation here. This is a rational function. We've got all these rational functions set up together into an equation. So this is a rational equation. Now the first thing you need to do is look at this and decide what your domain is. We know that in this case, x cannot be 1 or 3 because that would make the bottom 0. Now the other thing we have to find is our common denominator. Remember, you're looking for your least common multiple. So we have an x minus 1 in the bottom here, an x minus 3 in the bottom here, and this one doesn't have a bottom, so that means it's just 1. So our least common multiple, our common denominator, is going to be x minus 1 times x minus 3, because that's all the factors taken into consideration there. So when you're solving a rational equation, what you do is you take the whole equation, both sides, and multiply it times your common denominator. So when we multiply this times this first part here, the x minus 1s are going to cancel, and we'll just have x minus 3 times x plus 2. And then the second part here, the x minus 3s will cancel, and we'll have x minus 1 times x. And over here we've got nothing to cancel, so it's going to keep both pieces. Now once we are here, we have to multiply it out so that we can solve it. So we multiply this out and we have x squared, and then we're doing our FOIL here, x squared minus x minus 6 plus, and then this one we're just distributing, x squared minus x equals, and this one we have to FOIL and do, we have the 5 out front, we'll go ahead and FOIL it first. And then start combining like terms, so we have 2x squared minus 2x minus 6, and then we distribute that 5. Now remember, when you have a quadratic, you've got to get it equal to 0 to be able to solve it. So we need everything all on one side. So you start arranging, let's subtract all this over to here. So we get 0 equals 3x squared minus 18x plus 21. Remember, the first thing you do when you're solving is you look for something common that we can factor out. So first of all, we can take out the 3, x squared minus 6x plus 7. Now, this does not factor nicely, so we're going to have to use that quadratic formula. So we have x equals opposite b, so we take the opposite sign of that, so it's positive 6, plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And if you calculate that all out, you get 3 plus or minus the square root of 2. So those are our answers. So we check those and we say, well, are they 1 or 3? No, they're not. Well, then we're good. Those are our answers. Those are the two possible answers for this equation. So to solve a rational equation, check the domain so you know what your answers can't be. Then find your common denominator, multiply the whole thing through by the common denominator, and then all it is basic algebra 2, where you multiply it out and solve it your quadratic, or whatever form it happens to take. All right, let's try an application of this. Okay, so we've got a father and a son, and they're cutting the grass. It takes them 4 hours to do the whole job if they work together. But if they're working alone, then the son takes 2 hours longer than the father. If I want to know how long it takes them individually, how am I going to figure that out? Well, let's make a little chart here. Well, we know that together it takes them 4 hours. We don't know how long the father takes, but we do know that the son takes 2 hours longer. So that's the number of hours it takes them. So what if I break this down into pieces? I don't know how many acres it is, so I can't really say how long does it take him to cut 1 acre, but I can break it into parts. If I say parts per hour, then I know that I'm doing 1 part every 4, or I'm doing the whole every 4 hours. So I'm doing 1/4 of this in an hour. So the father is doing the whole thing in X hours. So he's doing 1/X parts of the acreage in the 1 hour. So the son is doing 1/X plus 2. So you see each hour together they do 1/4, and each hour the father does 1/X, and each hour the son does 1/X plus 2. Think about that for a second and make sure that makes sense. Okay, so if they're working together, that means that the father's pace, how much he's doing each hour, plus the son's pace of how much he's doing each hour, has to total how much they do all together each hour. So we've broken it down to what happens each hour so that we can compare them, because we need something that's the same. We've got to compare apples to apples. So we're comparing what happens in 1 hour. All right, so now we've just got a rational equation. So we need to make sure we remember x cannot be 0 and x cannot be -2. Well, neither one of those are going to make sense anyway, because we're talking about how many hours it takes the father to cut the grass is x. So that's not going to be a problem. So now we need our common denominator. We've got an x here, an x plus 2 here, and a 4 here. So really, we're just going to have to use all of them, because nothing breaks down to give us a factor that we don't need. So we have 4x times x plus 2. Multiply the whole thing through by that. So when we multiply this, the x's cancel, and we're left with 4 times x plus 2. When we multiply this, we're left with 4x. And when we multiply this one, we're left with x times x plus 2. So multiply. And combine our like terms. Then get everything all on one side. Okay, this doesn't factor, so we need to use our quadratic formula. So we have x equals opposite b, so that means 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. So we're going to end up adding 8 there, all over 2a. Now if you calculate this out, you'll get 2 answers. You'll get one is about 7.123 hours, and you'll get another one that's negative 1.123, but that doesn't make sense. We're not going to use a negative number of hours in this problem. So what we know is that the father takes 7.123 hours, so that means the son by himself will take 9.123 hours. So, solving rational equations, set up your equation, multiply through by your least common multiple or your common denominator, and then just solve it with your Algebra 2 techniques. Make sure you've read section 5.2 and taken notes on all of it so that you can show it at the next class.